My guest is Daniel Griffith from Wingina, Virginia. He is the owner of Timshel Wildlands, which is his farm, founder of Robinia Institute, a savory hub, host of Denusion podcast. Daniel is my teacher in the Ecological Outcome Verification course with the Savory Institute, author of Wildlife Flowers, and author of a new book, Dark Cloud Country. Daniel, how are you doing today?
Hey, Hart, it's a blessing to be with you. Thanks for spending the time.
And likewise, I've been excited about this. So what is it like living in the mountains of Central Virginia?
Oh my gosh, a dream in my humble opinion. I was raised in Northeast Ohio. I was talking to someone else very recently just about this. In Northeast Ohio, it's a fine place. If that's where anybody listening to this is from, I'm sure you might like it. I didn't. I'm a fan of sunshine. I'm a fan of mountains and more wild places where we lived. It was about 30 minutes south of Cleveland. And last time I checked, on average, we got 80 days of sunshine a year. And here in Central Virginia, it's like 250 days of sunshine a year. And that's not necessarily always a good thing, although we're more comfortable here. It's our context, if you will. It presents problematic. It presents problems in ecosystem function, as maybe we'll get into. This idea of sun, enduring through the summer months with little rain. But anyways, I'm perched in our little library here. It's kind of hard to see. We have just, I don't know, there's probably 30 feet worth of bookshelves from floor to ceiling. And my window here, it overlooks a big valley. There's foothills on the other side, these sheer rock faces that are just absolutely gorgeous. I look at them every day, watch the sunrise. I'm facing east. I watch the sunrise every morning, sitting here writing or reading. The James River flows right in the valley, as you probably remember, Hart. It's a good place to be. It's interesting from a community perspective. We moved here a while ago, and our oldest daughter was, all of our kids were born here, but our oldest daughter was also born here. And when she was born, we called our neighbor, who was the second boat of Jamestown. His family has been on that property since the second boat of Jamestown, or, they're following old timers. True old timers in a Southern perspective. And we asked him, his name was Jimmy. He just passed. He was 87 years old. And at the time we asked him, we said, Jimmy, it is our daughter, who's named Elowen. Is she native Wingina? It's like, how does the community see? And he's like, no. Unless you have your great grandpa buried in your front yard, we don't see you as Virginian. And so I'm Virginian at heart, although not in reality. We have a lot of learning to do, right? From many perspectives, both indigenous and Anglo-cultured. It's interesting. I bring this up, and I really want to make this comment. In the 1990s, there was an archaeological study conducted on our land, what will then become Timshel Wildland, by Virginia Tech and surrounding universities, looking at the archaeological and anthropological evidence of a long-term indigenous settlement of this region. They found one dating back to, it was continually inhabited as far back as the Paleo-Indian period, which is about 10,000 years ago. Unbelievable. And it was more or less continually inhabited by thousands and thousands of indigenous peoples for the last 10,000 years, the most recent of which was the Monacan Indian nation and the Manahoac nations of the Siouan indigenous peoples. And it's an ancient landscape, and it breathes ancient, it smells ancient. And we're just happy to be a passing member in its regeneration. So,
right. Let me share with you some of my memories or impressions of Timshel Wildlands. I remember the beautiful silhouette of the mountains in the distance. That may be the Blue Ridge Mountains.
It is. That's right. Yep. Facing west.
I remember the yellow crownbeard and coralberry bushes in your pasture. How can you have broadleaf and bushes in your pastures, Daniel? To think of that. I remember the 350-year-old oak tree that was born before Benjamin Franklin was born, and the
Mhm.
tall pines with blueberry bushes almost carpeting the forest floor along with the pine needles. So you have these tall pines, you have the rust color or the light brown color of the pine needles, and you have these vivid light green blueberry bushes peeking up in them. And I'm jealous because I wasn't there for the harvest of the blueberries.
We this isn't a story about blueberries, but that of autumn olives, another shrub that has some questions to some people. We love it. We love it to death. It's one of the most prized species here at the Wildland Project. We taught a course in August, which is right at the beginning of its fruiting season. And it was a 12-day course last year. And we spent the majority of every spare moment and every meal moment foraging autumn olives. We ate pounds and pounds and pounds of autumn olives. We turned them into leathers and jellies and jams. It was a special time. Next time we have an EOV course, we should do it during the height of blueberry season, early July, I think, if I recall correctly, middle July maybe, so that we can go foraging. There's nothing like foraging, I think.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. I think I speak as an agriculturalist here. Farmers, regenerative farmers especially, we get so caught up in producing abundance, we forget that there's also this thing called abundance that doesn't need produced.
Right.
There's some fun conversations there, but the point is foraging. When you realize the foraging potential around you, I think you realize a new state of being.
Absolutely, I'm on board with that. Foraging, you're dealing with very nutritious food. There's been no time on the shelf. So it's nutritious, it's low carbon, it's accessible, it's available. It's probably what our ancestors, they foraged for berries and other types of plants to eat, and they hunted, and that's how they ate. So tell us about the wildlife on Timshel Wildlands.
It's well, there's two ways of looking at it. The true definitional wildlife is really the impetus behind the project. We realized about 2 or 3 years into our quote unquote regenerative farming journey that the places that we were trying to regenerate were less healthy and less abundant from a wildlife perspective than the areas that were at the edge of that regeneration. And there's some interesting findings there that we can talk about. But over the last 5 or 6 years of really letting go a lot of control in the landscape, which again, maybe we can talk about, we've seen an increase in deer populations. On average, when we give tours, we give wildland tours, multiple times a week in the growing season. And we'll see between 12 to 15 different deer, probably 5 different families of deer moving through, some of which we've named. We have, I don't know how you say this properly, but we have a nesting black bear, a black bear that has made a home on our property, a mama sow. This year she had 2 beautiful baby cubs that will surprise you. We were picking blueberries and we turned around and there was a black bear, a mama black bear. Our sow that lives at the Wildland was also picking blueberries. She thought that was a nutritious treat as well. We left. Black bears aren't dangerous, but if she wants blueberries, I'm gonna let her have her blueberries, especially because if she has two cubs with her and I can't see the cubs, I don't know where they are. And if I don't know where they are, they could very well be on the other side of me.
Right.
And, then it could be dangerous. So we left. But we spotted a mountain lion a couple months ago, and the Virginia Department of Forestry or Ecology or whoever manages this data, if this data could be managed in Virginia, claims that there's no mountain lions in Virginia. They've been eradicated or made extinct. We took a picture and sent it to the Mountain Lion Foundation in California. Seems to be credible. They agree it was a mountain lion. So we've seen a mountain lion. There's bobcats. Our neighbor just got attacked by a bobcat, which is a pretty interesting story. So they're quite active, and there's a lot of deforestation and clear cutting going on around us right now in the state of Virginia. our marvelous Department of Forestry is actually giving tax credits and incentives to landowners to clear cut hardwood forests to compete with the lumber markets from China. I got chills when I said that, but
I know.
it's
It doesn't make any sense at all.
it's paralyzing and sad, and it's a grieving process that's going to need to happen. But the interesting thing is it's driving wildlife to places where habitation is happy or abundant, however you want to say that. And we're seeing that's true. We have an increase in deer, which then we had an increase in coyotes and mountain lions and bear and bobcat. And you mentioned crownbeard earlier. In the autumn, crownbeard is a I know the term native from a botanist perspective is problematic, but I'll use it anyways. It's a native, long-standing herbaceous perennial, flowering herbaceous perennial to the Virginia region and generally the Mid-Atlantic, Eastern temperate climate biome. But in the autumn, later August, early September into October, it has the most gorgeous yellow flowers, and we have entire fields, 100-acre fields here at the Wildland. Where in August, we actually remove the cows and from that field. We make sure we don't graze it as part of our holistic grazing plan to actually nurture crownbeard's emergence. We don't want to trample it too early in its life cycle. You want to get to its mature state. One, imagine just 100 acres of just yellow oceans. It's paralyzing, and it's gorgeous, and it's serene and sublime. But it's also a serious food source for migrating monarch butterflies and a couple others, especially in a land where milkweed and others are sprayed and herbicided. Like that's what they were asking for. Right. Crownbeard is a serious food source for pollinators. There's been years where we've walked through one of our fields named Daffodil. In the springtime, daffodils just inhabit that pasture like crazy, so we named it Daffodil, which is about 30 acres. And it's one of the places that crownbeard just takes over in the autumn. And we counted 100 different monarch butterflies and on about a 30-acre walk from one end to the other, maybe 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, just literally hundreds of monarchs just bouncing this way and that. It's interesting. You know, we talk a lot about biodiversity. Like just last week, I was with Fred Provenza. Him and I are working on a project and understanding how to integrate some of his findings in the wildlife space into the more farmed or agricultural landscape. The Wildland is this perfect canvas for really his thoughts to develop as further pilots in the agricultural movement. Because the Wildland we have feet in both sides. Some of it is a conservation minded approach. Some of the landscape is such. And some of the landscape is producing beef for our neighbors. And we're finding that the convergence of conservation and regenerative agriculture, which we call wild-ish or wildland or what have you, Timshel Wildland, is the most abundant place we've ever found that is also still harvestable. Again, I'm probably going to repeat myself too often, but maybe that's something we can talk about, the idea of wildness that could still be harvestable. It's an interesting phrase. But Fred and I, Fred and our team here, we're working on this idea of biodiversity, how when you start to release control, when you allow an environment to find its own resilience, that's what I mean by releasing control, right? We as regenerative farmers, you know, we like to build biodiversity. We like to plant it. Right? We like to, from an EOV, ecological outcome verification perspective, we like to see it, but it's very easy to plant it. A lot of the times when we plant it, it's not entirely resilient. It demands to be replanted or nurtured in a particular way to be sustained. Resilience, we say in courses here at the Robinia Institute, our hub and consulting educational organization that uses the Wildland as a demonstration site. Resilience is diversity and motion. In order for motion to be resilient, it also therefore has to be continuous. In college, I had this English professor that drilled into me the difference between continual and continuous. Continual is like, you know, your and I's conversations hard. Like we've continually over the years had conversations, but we are not in continuous conversation.
Right.
My wife and I are barely in continuous conversation. I myself have continuous conversations with myself. It's like a wheel. Continuous is a wheel that once it's rolling, it doesn't stop rolling. There's not jumps or hurdles. It doesn't skip. It's continuous. It rolls, and its roll is fluid and ever going. It's like the waves in the ocean. You can't stop them. For
So
motion to be
you've raised a
resilient,
very
it must be continuous.
very important issue, and that is how do in ecological outcome verification, you want to see increased diversity over time, and you can get that diversity without sowing seeds. How does that happen?
It's a really good point. Here at Robinia, we do a lot of consulting. Like last year, we managed and designed about 17,000 acres of different land across the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, it's a pretty big size of Robinia's yearly work in yearly community development. I would say on probably more than half of that landscape, what you just asked me is the question of the project. If we aren't producing abundance, right? I'm rephrasing your question. If we are not producing abundance, how can we have it? How can we nurture abundance? Maybe is a different way of asking it.
And you talked about letting go of control. That has something to do with it.
It does.
I associate Fred Provenza with like the nutritional value of food. Mm-hmm. So when you let go of control and you get diversity, does that lead to greater nutrition for everything? And is there more of abundance when you let go of control?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think first and foremost, I mean, to answer your question very simply, yes. But to go into the complexity of the thing, I was on a farm down in North Carolina that was very singular species. There was about 2 or 3 different species on the entire operation. It was very singular. And they wanted us to come in with a no-till drill and plant some cover crops and diversify. But it's a question, right? What a lot of our work at Robinia and at the Wildland here, what we're urging our students, what we're urging our farmers that we're working with from a consultation and mentorship perspective to do is not stop farming, but just halt and ask questions. And the question that this farmer needed to answer is if a perennial grass or a flower or an oak's acorn is viable in the soil surface for thousands of years, why isn't it growing on your landscape? Right. The existence of, just pick something. I mean, the existence
the seed
of
is there, but it doesn't have the conditions that
exactly
it's ready to grow in yet.
So the question is, what do we need to do to reawaken the wild? Right? Not push it, not produce it, not control it. The wild just needs reawakened. It's all there. But there's a reason that Sericea lespedeza is growing, not bird's foot trefoil. Right. And that reason, by the way, and this is the hard part of losing control or really stepping back to reawaken the wild instead of produce something else. This is the hard part. Maybe that system needs Sericea lespedeza and not bird's foot trefoil. Maybe the conditions that we have created as humanity has made it very hard for bird's foot trefoil to grow, but Sericea lespedeza, not so much. Right? There's complexity to this. It could be yes, it could be no, it could be the system needs time, it could be we've screwed the system up. The interesting convergence between what I'm saying here and Fred Provenza's work, as you're saying, Fred has studied the nutritional qualities and instincts of animals and humans and how they relate. And what we're finding is that, and this is a new thought to me, and this is all Fred, by the way, I take no ownership of this thought. This is his work and his genius. An animal given biodiversity, given rich amounts of diversity to forage, right? So like perennial grasses, runner grasses, a little bit of annuals, some herbaceous perennials, woody perennials, sedges, rushes, briars, everything. If you throw a smorgasbord at any animal, domestic or wild, it should be able to find life. A good life, a life enriched with nutrients. It should be able to provide the next phase of its trophic life cycle. Call it a human being eating it or a coyote eating it, doesn't matter. Just the next stage of its trophic cycle, nutrient dense meat. Right? Biodiversity produces nutrient dense meat. And there's some tension
because all of the different plants, animals, and fungi that are part of the diet of whatever it is, they all have different like phytochemicals and stuff like that
Exactly.
constitute, that gets into their body and makes them healthy and resilient. And then if they become food for something else, then that's where nutrient density comes from.
Exactly. And I think the thing to take away from this conversation and a lot of Fred's work is that nutrient density, or let's call it soil health, or just the health of the system, it's not linear and it cannot be reduced, right? So like a lot of this regenerative movement, we've not wrongfully so, it's still important work, but we've reduced this idea of health down to stable soil organic matter, or carbon in the soil, or the number of perennial grasses you have. Those are really important things. Stable soil organic matter is unparalleled in its ability to create and nurture and sustain the rest of the system. It's a foundational building block, absolutely. But the interesting thing is, Suzanne Simard, Dr. Suzanne Simard wrote a book, called Finding the Mother Tree, where she did these studies, university studies, where they planted an alder, as I believe, next to a cedar tree. And they planted these two trees, and they took 100% shade cloth, a shade cloth that cut out all, 100% of the sun's energy, and they placed it over the cedar tree. And then they so the cedar tree could not photosynthesize. That's the most important part of that. Right. And then they measured over the next couple of years the cedar's growth, and it didn't die. So if a plant, cedar tree, tall fescue, doesn't matter what it is, if a plant requires photosynthesis to grow, but it's not actually undergoing photosynthesis and it's still growing, there's complexity here, right? We must stop and ask questions. What's going on? The alder, or the whatever it was, I think it was like an alder or something, was feeding the cedar tree carbon nutrients underneath the soil via the mycorrhizae fungi communication network, right? And so plants in community are able to co-create. We call this emergence. They're able to co-create and self-organize and co-evolve nutrients out of nowhere. Right. And so we're so focused on the soil, we got to get the soil back in check. Yes, that's true. But right. But we also, yes, we have to get the soil back in check. We have to balance the soil from a macro and micro mineral perspective, and, all of that sort of stuff. We got to get carbon cycling through the system, and the water cycle is of vital importance. Yes, all of this is painfully and bloody true. But plants in community within that system are definitely just as true and just as needed. And what Fred is claiming or finding in his research, and what we're finding here at Timshel, it might be more true, or at least more needed, right? Because, pigweed, spicy amaranth, fixes phosphorus. So if you have a soil deficient in phosphorus, you need spicy or spiny amaranth or pigweed. But pigweed grown next to, pick a plant that requires phosphorus, but it's not growing in phosphorus valent soils, is going to be a better plant than if it just grows on other soils, right? So the community dynamics, or the dynamics of the system's community, right, is of vital importance to the health of the community, the resilience of the community, but also the nutrient richness coming out of that community. And it's interesting.
So what is it there that is of interest to farmers and or consumers?
Yes, it's a really good point.
It's very interesting to me. I'm just making conversation.
No, it's a really good question. It's a really good question. Ground a more theoretical conversation. There's hope there.
Recently, one of the more interesting things I've been looking at recently, Dr. Christine Jones of Australia talks about the Jena experiments and how you need a certain number of plant families. A family is a group of genuses or genera. Genus is a group of species. So it's the plant families, the third level up. And if you have diversity of plant families, then that's where the magic is in terms of building soil carbon, which sounds reductionist, but if you're building soil carbon, you're probably doing some other things right. And that diversity of plant families tends to engender a diversity of soil health and diversity of like nutrient value, and the animals come by and they can, feed off of the plants and also maybe find nesting and things like that within the plants. But that diversity of families and the fact that we think of plants as we think of nutrients flowing from the soil to the plants, but the plants through their roots, they take energy from the sun, they take a certain amount and they exude, sugars and proteins through their roots and create the whole soil food web. So plants are really a driver of the soil ecosystem and the other ecosystems.
Right. And enriching their community has exponential effects to the health of the whole. And you asked, why should we care? And it's hope. What you just said and what I just reiterated is hope. If you don't have bird's foot trefoil, right? Manage for bird's foot trefoil. That's the best way of planting bird's foot trefoil. Now, listen, nature might not.
Because birds and mammals that are coming in, they've been eating those seeds from elsewhere, and they're going to poop out the seeds and deposit them where you are.
That's exactly right.
And not only do you get the seed, but you get their manure with all of the biological richness that's in their manure.
Right. And if you take a more long-standing native plant, again, using the term native, I understand, but a long-standing native plant like yellow Indian grass, it's ridiculous to think that in every viable meadow in Virginia today, that yellow Indian grass isn't there in the soil seed bank, if you will, waiting to grow. Like, is bird's foot trefoil there? I don't know. But is yellow Indian grass? Yes. Absolutely yes. Unequivocally yes. Is eastern gamma grass just waiting to explode? Yes. Yes, but we also know this. When we first moved on to Timshel 7 years ago, we did a full ecological study and identified no gamma grass, not one blade. Today, we have pastures that are dominated by gamma grass, and then they're dominated by yellow Indian grass, and then they're dominated by this unbelievable lush mix of autumn wildflowers. It's so dominant, right, that we wrote a whole book about it, Wildlife Flowers. You cannot in the springtime or in the autumn come to Timshel here in Central Virginia for a tour, for a class, for whatever, and not leave thinking, yes, this is what it means to be wild like flowers. It's impossible, right? Biodiversity explodes when, and I want to really emphasize this, biodiversity and a system that is the environment's resilience explodes when we step back, right? And we lose the credit, right? And I'm not saying credit is a bad thing. What I'm saying is, when we become a member of the system, we operate within the system. But when we become that member, when we become an aspect of the system, if you will, we lose our ability to control and colonize it. We cannot control and colonize something that we also inhabit. Now, we can only control and colonize that which we are on top of, we are separate from, right? The story of separation, right, allows colonization and control and production for production's sake to occur. When we step back, right, and become a member of the system, as much as the cow, as much as the mountain lion are members of the system, as much as the low bush blueberries or the autumn olives or the bison or buffalo bush or whatever fruit you want to harvest today, when we become members of the system as much as they are, the system explodes because it is in harmony and resonance with itself, right? That's the hope. That's the hope. We don't need to manufacture abundance.
One of the things I say is that if you have a restoration project going on, and if you're working too hard, you're probably doing it wrong.
I like that.
The sun shines and gives the power. Nature and the plants, the fungi, the animals, the microbes, there's almost infinite creativity. And if you let the sun and the rain and nature and the plants do the work, then that's where the abundance comes from.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think a lot, I was in a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Charles Eisenstein, the brilliant author and thinker in this relative space. And he reminded me, I think a lot of us in this modern climate movement, soil matters, climate matters, we have good work to do movement. We get lost in this idea that we don't have enough time. We're running out of time. And in some sense, that's true, right? Climate refugees are actual, actually with us today, and natural disasters are increasing. The key here, the climate has always fluctuated. And I'm not trying to say that anthropogenic climate change of today and such isn't real. Yes, humans have created a plastic problem. We've created a chemical problem. We've created a dependence, of our crops into certain conditions that we can't upkeep. We're running out of soil. Like, these are serious problems. I'm not trying to, diminish these problems. But 10,000 years ago, maybe 12,000 years ago, the land in which I inhabit today was under an ice cap. Right. And then the ice cap receded and wildfires ravaged this region for thousands of years. And then the climate settled. It found a nice place of stability, if you will. And this is the modern era. And maybe we're gravitating away from this modern era. The point is, nature undulates, right? Life happens. Death nurtures life through death, or life nurtures life through death, however you want to say that. We can't forget about the death process. But the hope that we're continually, or I should say continuously, I should speak very clear, because it is continuous. It's all the time. We see this every day. The hope that we're continuously presented with at Timshel here is life is seeking harmony, and it's seeking it in its own time, and it's not hurrying. It's urgent. It's urgent. There's a difference. Charles reminded me there's a difference between hurry and urgency. Hurry is manufacturing abundance. Urgency is dedication to purpose. These are two different things, right? Mother Earth, Mother Nature, our landscape, the ecosystem that we are part of, and the environment that is our individual contexts, it's urgent. We have urgent and very purposeful work to do, but at pace with how nature wants to respond. And I'm not saying you shouldn't go out there and plant a tree. I'm just saying that if you want a tree to grow, that's not the only option. We have a pilot here, for instance, a 30-acre plot of here at the Wildland, where we've utilized very strategic and purposeful animal impact and grazing systems of cattle, sheep, and goats to plant a savanna or silvopasture. But we didn't plant any trees. We just graze in such a way. We basically graze for trees. Like we were saying earlier, if you want Sericea lespedeza or birds for trefoil, manage for those things and they'll come. If you want trees, manage for trees, they'll come. We have a pasture full of 7-foot tall trees that was a open grassland just 3 or 4 years ago. And all the trees now are 7-8 feet tall. And the most beautiful part, in our opinion, is twofold. One of which, we did no work. Like you were saying, a restoration project where you're tired and overworking is probably not a good restoration project. We did no work. The system matured on its own. We just nurtured it through. We were a participant, as the cows and the trees were a participant. But also, too, all of those trees as mothers are right there. They're right there watching us, and they're nurturing their young. It's a system under the embrace of community and lineage, right? And thereby it is a system of hope, because it's possible, right? We don't have to hurry. I think we all get lost in hurrying. That's really what I wanted to say.
Well, Daniel, tell us about the journey that led you to regenerative agriculture.
That's a big one. I'll give it to you as short as I can. I've done a podcast where it was like an hour and a half long, and it was just my story. And I hate talking about myself. So we'll get through this together, and we'll get to it briefly. Growing up, like I said earlier at the very beginning, native of Northeast Ohio, grew up to a entrepreneur minded father, grew up on 30 acres. We were outdoorsy, but in no way agricultural. I wanted to grow up to be just like my dad, run some tech companies. He owned some tech companies and telecom things. And that's just the way I saw my life going, and was highly athletic, had a pretty successful athletic career. In high school, I Division I scholarships to anywhere where I wanted to go for football and wrestling and such. My senior year, I was diagnosed with a severe degenerative genetic disease.
Hmm.
And for the next 5 years after that, obviously didn't go to college to play football. My weight fluctuated. My life pretty much ended. I lost the ability to walk, severe depression, lived in hospitals. I lived at the Cleveland Clinic for 9 months, just relearning how to walk. Like literally I had doctors that would touch my quad and told me to flex my quad, and I couldn't do it. And that was the whole day's exercise, was try to figure out where your quad muscle was. Obviously I'm skipping over a lot of details, but there's enough there to suffice. And traveled all over the country, lived in hospitals, like I said, surgeries. I've had all of my limbs taken off my body and put back on, trying to solve these problems. And we never could get there. We might have fixed momentarily a particular aspect of the greater problem, but we only created more problems in the process. And one day I was sitting in our back porch at our place in Northeast Ohio, and it was a spring day. I'll never forget it. I was sitting outside with a little fire. Springtime in Ohio is like the only time to be in Ohio, in my opinion. It's glorious and marvelous, and the colors are back, and the birds are there because they're all in their migration pathways. And I was reading a book, and it was actually a friend of mine who had become a serious and dedicated mentor in my life, had gifted me, of all things, Joel Salatin's Folks This Ain't Normal, that book. I mean, I was not agricultural. I didn't think about agriculture. I mean, I was working in the tech space part-time and obviously virtually. At the time, my wife was working full-time in the clothing industry, if you will. And he just thought it was an interesting book for me to read. And so I was reading it, and I started to see these patterns, right, of health and all sorts of things. And I'll let you dive into the book in your own way. It's an interesting book, agricultural, no doubt. And it starts to postulate these ideas of a regenerative agricultural activity.
So, briefly, Folks This Ain't Normal is about how abnormal our time period is in terms of food, agriculture, our relationship with the land, et cetera.
Yeah, and what a perfect canvas, right? Because I'm sitting there as a 20-something-year-old individual. I probably weighed 130 pounds. I was nothing. I mean, I was literally wasting away. And I'm reading this book, and it's like, yes, this couldn't be normal. My wife is working full time. I can barely move. I'm relearning how to walk. I weigh less than I did in, I think, 5th or 6th grade, right? And I'm in my 20s. This is nothing normal there. And I'll never forget, it was the biggest moment, one of the most important days of my life, if not the most important day. My mom walked out of the back onto the patio, and of all things, in her own way, and you could tell she's been thinking about this. She was emotional and maybe even crying, a little tear, watery eyes. And she said, "Daniel, we've tried everything." And we had. I mean, she had been with me all over the country for years and years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? As you could imagine, in medical bills. I mean, we were not in a good financial place. Like this, it was serious. And she said, "But the only thing we haven't tried is chickens." And to this moment, I laugh. It's hilarious. Like, what are you talking about? and that was my response at the time. I was like, "What do you mean chickens?" And she said, "Listen, we've been passive." And just like I credit some of the thoughts I said earlier to Charles Eisenstein and Fred Provenza, like I'm a sponge. I soak information in. And so I'm going to happily give her the credit here. These are not my ideas. These are her. This is her wisdom, her maternal wisdom. She said, we have been passive up to this point. We've gone to hospitals and we've begged for healing, but what we have never facilitated is active health, right? We've never looked at our lives and said, let's change the way we think. Let's change the way we live. Let's change the way we eat. And in her opinion, raising 100 chickens in the backyard was the first step of changing those 3 items, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And so that day, without even asking my wife, which is a joke between us to this day, we went online to a hatchery, Murray Hatchery, bought 100 black Australorp chickens. We knew nothing of pasture-raised poultry. We knew nothing. I mean, I didn't even know who Joel Salatin was. I mean, I was reading his book, but that's the totality of what I knew about him. I didn't know, chicken tractors and soil health. I knew nothing of that. I didn't even know how to raise a chicken. But we jumped in. We fell in love. Within the next couple of years, we had a market garden that we were actively working. Health was returning. I started actually volunteering at the individual who gave me that book's operation. He ran a 200 head or multi-hundred head grass-fed and finished truly regenerative and holistically managed. He was one that put me onto Savory cattle operation just south of Cleveland, Ohio. And there's some interesting stories there, but we just continued to fall in love with it, and health started to truly come back. And there's things I'm skipping over. But those are the most important parts. And as we grew into it, we realized we're not gardeners. Market gardening is not a thing that brings us joy or peace. I'll tell you that. Just stress and anxiety. And working with animals is truly the joys of our life. And I say working with animals. We don't work animals, right? I don't believe in working animals. I believe that we work with animals, and there's a huge difference there. In Wild Like Flowers, my book, there's a whole chapter dedicated to this idea that if you want to move cattle, just ask, right? We have to understand that as we become a part of this system, we are not forcers or pushers or drivers, right? We don't drive our cattle. That is a huge difference there, right? We move our cows 1.5 miles across the wildland, and we just go for a run, and they follow, and it's glorious and gorgeous, and people literally come out and pay just to watch them run. It's the craziest thing. It's peaceful, and that's what we wanted to do. And we were looking for land in Northeast Ohio. We couldn't find any lands, $50,000, $100,000 an acre, and I could have bought like 1 acre. And we ended up working with some family land down here in Virginia, and it just emerged from there. So,
what are your hopes and desires for farms in the eastern United States?
Well, I got a lot. I got a lot. I think if I were to boil it down, this idea of community is ecosystem resilience, biodiversity from a vegetative perspective is interesting, but bringing the entire community together to form a more beautiful and more resilient world is what we are focused on. Can biodiversity from a vegetative aspect or perspective exist if the human community is degenerating around it? I don't think it can. Can we have healthy soils can a community have healthy soils if the souls of those communities are not healthy? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think long has the rhetoric around this regenerative movement focused too reductionistly on different individual parts of health. I think that true abundance, true hope exists where we stand back and we start to understand that soil health is just as important as social health. Farmers working together, farmers having access to land, farmers working in reciprocity and community with one another to achieve a greater abundance that is far beyond the potential of all of the individual farms in isolation. Right? It's a bartering.
Let's talk about how to make that happen, because sometimes I think that there's really at least two aspects or two leverage points to this. One of them is getting consumers to want to buy locally and regeneratively. And the other thing is empowering producers to do the work and do it profitably. So how can that happen?
Yeah, those are great questions. I wish I had a magic wand or at least a perfectly clear mind to answer them. Right now, we have questions like you. We are trying to co-create potential solutions within community out here in the Mid-Atlantic. We're facing hurdles. We have problems. We're co-creating around those problems, but it's a slow process. The consumerism side is overwhelming to me. So overwhelming that let me, if this is a new thought to anybody listening, let me be the first to tell you, I don't think we have a regenerative future ahead of us if consumerism doesn't soon die. I think consumerism is the most degenerative aspect of modern life, period.
What do you mean by that? And what do you mean by consumerism?
Yeah, that's a good point of clarification. Consumerism is, I don't want to use the term again, but the intake or the consumption of like life without the return of life. right? So like right now, if you are someone who goes to a farm and buys from them and you don't support them in any other way, you're a consumer. You are consuming their goods, but you're not a part of the system, right? It would be as if, you walked out to the nature, you harvested every autumn olive or blueberry bush you ever saw. You saw a black bear and you said, get the hell out of here, black bear, they're my blueberries. That's a consumer.
Let me
Right?
share with you one aspect of that I think, and that is the impact of our consumption is out of sight, out of mind.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Totally. No, that's a really good point. Out of sight, it's disconnection, right? It's a story of separation. And this is the brilliance of Charles Eisenstein, right? That's obviously a quote, story of separation from him. This is not my term. I think, in a podcast I did very recently with some health guy from Texas, the Austin region, I said in the podcast, we have two diverging systems or mothers today. We have mother culture and mother earth, and you can only have one mother. Consumerism, right? This out of sight, out of mind, disconnectedness, bifurcation of different aspects that should be integrated into a state of interbeing. This is consumerism. Consumerism lies in mother culture, right? It's industry that produces toys, right, in China, and they ship it over here, and we give it away at Christmas. Like, this is consumerism, right? Give a gift at Christmas. I'm not saying don't, right? But what I'm saying is there's no system. there's no system that can survive when its members are disconnected. That's not a system, right? That's an industry.
Okay, so let's make an analogy of people to plants. Plants know that they need to form communities, and the alder tree you were talking about supports the cedar tree. The cedar tree, for that point of time, does not have any independent source of energy, but the alder plant does it. And the alder plant knows, maybe instinctively, that what goes around comes around. If the alder tree gives, then there's going to come a day when the cedar tree gives back, that kind of thing. And many facets of that. The fungi give to the plants, the bacteria, etc., give to everything. But if human culture, I agree, has become like competitive and disconnected, and so.
Yeah, it's a strange question, and I know this is a hard question. But does my landscape's regeneration mean anything if my neighbors die of hunger? And I don't mean not eating. I mean, they're dying of nutrient deficiencies.
Right.
Does my landscape's regeneration matter if my neighbors die of hunger, nutrient deficiencies? This is a question that has to be asked. We don't have, and this goes back to the beginning in which you asked for clarification. We're coming back to the beginning. We do not have a regenerative future, right? If we don't start thinking from the community's perspective. Regenerating Timshel Wildland means nothing if the Wingina community of Central Virginia isn't regenerating. And I mean that economically, I mean that socially, I mean that equitably. I mean this equitably, and I mean this ecologically, right? I mean from the whole of life's system, regeneration has to pertain to all of it. And that's huge, right? In order for this to happen, it takes all of us. But notice this.
What does that regeneration at the community level look like?
Yeah. It's a good question.
It's just a question.
I know. Getting farmers to work together.
It's hard because nobody can do everything.
Yeah.
We're not given really a playbook for this.
Yeah, and there's also we live in a weird time where my neighbors, truly some of my neighbors, and I say my neighbors, I don't literally mean the person next door. I mean to the Central Virginia community, because that's still community. Like I don't mean to say like my neighbors are the totality of my community. We obviously rely on and more neighbors than that, a bigger community than that. But my neighbors do not believe that CAFO, grain-fed, grain-finished beef standing in muck and mire and manure their entire life is a bad thing. And the reason they don't think it as a bad thing is it's out of sight, out of mind. This is consumerism. But in addition to that, they are not yet experiencing pain. Like on my own podcast, Denusion, the Daniel Griffith podcast, I just interviewed Abby Smith, the global network coordinator of the Savory Institute. And the whole podcast was basically around this question: how do we instigate true transformation and change without pain? It's very hard to do, right? If you're not dying and losing your bodily function and your life isn't ending, do you raise 100 chickens in the backyard? I wouldn't have. I simply wouldn't have done it. That was the impetus behind my change, which was pain. And so how do we instill a new paradigm in a community that is not open, right, for new paradigms? That's the question, right? Because this all has to happen patiently, right? We're going back to this idea of patience. Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his book on nature, or in his essay on nature, we must accept the pace of nature, and her secret is patience. This natural patience, the pace of nature being patience, this natural patience isn't just informing biological succession and thereby community resilience. It is informing and undergirding. It is the paradigm for all life. Social and communal development, or community-based development in the human sector, right, requires patience. It requires letting go of control. It requires emergence, right? All of these things matter on both sides, human sector, ecological sector, because there is no two sides, right? It's all one whole. It's one ecosystem. We are all a part of the same ecosystem. There's one world, is what I'm trying to say there. There's not the human world and the natural world and the wild world. It's all one world. That's my point. All of the lessons and understandings of ecology extend to the social scene as well, in their own way, in their own time. And that time is patience. And so I don't have any large answers right now. The Robinia Institute, we're running something called the Commonwealth Network, where we're bringing together a large network of verified regenerative human scale farms, trying to start this process, start the conversations, begin formulating some potential pilots. They're like questions of pilots. This solution is going to come from the everyone, and the Commonwealth Network is really just a meeting ground for the conversation to be started. Aspects of the Commonwealth Network include EOV, right? Helping farmers, mentorship and support in classes and trainings. We have financing options for farms. Let's just face it, land acquisition and infrastructure funding is not right now an equitable system for all farms, new farms, et cetera. Like, we have some real work to do there, and we're slowly playing in that space. And we're also trying to work as an aggregator, so that the farmers, the Commonwealth Network as an aggregator, so that farmers can farm, right? And the local community can still be nourished by their provisions without them having to do excess work.
Let's look a little bit at what's messed up about supply and demand. And that is our markets, our local markets are flooded with cheap food, the cheap food that's not very healthy.
Yeah.
And that outcompetes that you're not paying the true cost of probably the food that you're eating, and you're certainly not paying the true cost of food that would be much healthier, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So how can we do a better job of marketing direct to consumers?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I think after 2 years, we have a whole team in our community here that works through this side of our life. In 2 years with this team, we have identified that question has no answer. As long as a consumer remains a consumer, there's no marketing to them. We can't. No verified regenerative, truly collaborative, human scale local farm can outprice. Anybody. Any larger entity. White Oak Pastures, Force of Nature Meats, Rep Provisions, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, Butcher Box. I can keep naming them. Whole Foods, right? Grayson Natural Beef. All of these larger systems. I don't say, I'm not saying here that these are bad systems, right? I'm just saying no local, human scale, verified regenerative, truly healthy and collaborative farm can compete with that financially. In addition, we cannot compete to the convenience of that, right? Go online to any of those organizations I just said, place an order. It'll be there 2 or 3 days from now in beautiful packaging. Right. 2 of those organizations that I just named, I know personally, one of them just got like a couple, well, in the tens of millions of dollars investment for marketing and product development. They are reaching consumers, and that is a very good thing. I've said this in the past. We have Mother Culture, we have Mother Earth. We can only have one mother. Mother Culture is coming down. We need Mother Earth to be resilient and truly parallel system to sustain us. What the organizations I just mentioned, they're scaffolding Mother Culture, and this is a very good thing, right? The individuals who typically buy their beef at Walmart now have the ability to buy their beef similarly priced from these organizations and maintain their convenience. This is exactly what needs to happen. This is a necessary development in the creation, or I should say co-creation, of a more beautiful world. But local farmers can't compete with that. We just can't. This is never going to happen. And in the crazy thing is in collaborative and community-based systems full of resilience and diversity and reciprocity, and to use the word again, collaborative emergence, that we can even say the word compete. In a system full of collaboration, why do we feel like we have to compete? This is another serious problem. The source of this problem is consumerism. The source of this problem is consumerism. I would venture to believe that there's a farmer of decent quality around most people. And I'm not talking to people who live in downtown New York City or downtown Boston or downtown Chicago. I don't know these places, right? But if you're in Richmond, you're in Charlottesville, you're in Lynchburg. I mean, these are huge cities. Well, Lynchburg is the smallest of those 3, but these are huge cities. Alexandria, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland. There are so many good farmers all around, and they need to stay farming. They can't give you convenience that your consumerism is demanding. Their need in the system is to nurture the ecology of the system, right? Not to be a salesperson, not to be a marketer. Like 2 years ago when we started the Commonwealth Network and the aggregation arm of it all, we did this huge survey. We surveyed a lot of people. We participated in a survey, I should say. We didn't truly run the survey, but we found that on average, human scale farms under 800 or 1,000 acres in the mid-Atlantic, so the eastern side, central, east of the United States, they work 80 hours a week farming and 37 hours a week in addition marketing. We just filmed this mini documentary that's going viral all over the social media, internet thing. And there's a moment in it where I bring up these stats and then I say, we can't even get marketing companies to work 37 hours a week. And our farmers are doing this week in and week out, week in and week out. And the craziest, this to me this gets down to equity. This gets down to truly creating a new system. It's a new vision. I can't even call it a system. It's unbounded and open, but 80 hours a week farming, 37 hours a week marketing. And on average, these farmers are taking home $18,000 pre-mortgage and pre-tax. You are a very intelligent person, Hart. You know what that take home is, right? They're literally not making anything.
Right.
Nothing, right? And just so anyways, what I'm saying here is these are huge problems. We don't have the solution. We are working in community to postulate pilots that maybe are going to work to question, to form the questions or the questionable foundations of a new system. My point is we are so early stage and we need literally all of us to start embarking on this deeper work. And it begins with individual farms, right? Working in their community and working in this way. And what emerges from there, I don't know.
Okay. So we're coming toward the end of our time. I want you to be able to talk about Robinia Institute, your holistic management course, your ecological outcome verification course. One thing that I remember you saying is that you start your holistic management course with the question, who thinks that holistic management is regenerative grazing? All the hands go up. By the end of the course, who thinks holistic management is regenerative grazing? Nobody thinks that anymore because holistic management is so much more than regenerative grazing. But talk about how through Robinia Institute, you're trying to be part of the solution by teaching and mentoring people and introducing them to truly holistic management.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, so my wife and I, we co-own and co-run the Robinia Institute. Back in 2019, we became the Mid-Atlantic hub of the Savory Institute. We do a lot of work. Savory is an aspect of our greater whole, but it's a serious and dedicated aspect. We do consulting. I travel all around the country speaking and educating, and we write obviously books and all sorts of things. But from an educational perspective, which is really our focus, it's really our focus. We have a phrase here at Robinia that we work from the soul to the soil, and it's really education that meets people in their souls. And in our courses, it's interesting. This hasn't backfired yet, but we'll throw an EOV course, Ecological Outcome Verification course, which is highly technical, or we'll throw, a 10-day holistic management course to people who came to learn holistic grazing or regenerative grazing or how to graze cattle in pastures, right? Very practice oriented, right? They come from this paradigm, and they came at the course to learn, these practices, and over half the course is philosophical. It's over half the course is philosophical, and we do this on purpose. If we cannot first regenerate the soul, we're never going to get to the soil, right? And so in our courses, we spend an exceptional amount of times in the soul. And what we find is when we get to the soil, because we do, I promise, it's a course, we get to the soil, we have so much more holistic foundation of what health is, that soil is just a member of that. It's much more accessible, because it makes sense. We've done this for 4 or 5 days straight now. And so all of our courses are structured in that way. And if you've listened to this episode or video or podcast long enough, you can tell I'm more of a philosopher than a doer. And I like it that way. And
well, you're a very hardworking, action-oriented guy. I took an ecological outcome verification course. It was 4 days, and then we did 4 days of work in Kentucky. And it's like the Army commercial. It's the hardest work you'll ever love.
My goodness. Yeah, you and I shared a hotel room
hard
for
work,
4 nights
but it's
straight.
fun work.
Yes. Yeah. No, and that's, I really like what Charles was saying that we talked about earlier, this difference between hurry and urgency, right? Hurry is busy work, right? It's working because there's seemingly work to be done. It's not doing the right work in the right time with the right mentality. So I know I agree with you. I really appreciate that. Our courses are all here at Timshel, which is a draw for a lot of people. It's 400 acres of wildness, and there's, like, we just built 3 ponds. They're actually, the last one is currently being built now. There's always projects going on, huge earthwork projects, meditation projects. Like, we just built this really cool meditation deck. It's like 12 feet off the ground on the top of this huge hillside overlooking about 170 acres of the wildland, for meditations and nature watching. It's an observation spot. We're trying to integrate or we're trying to allow our students the ability to really integrate into the soul of the work, which is also themselves. Like, that's what you find when you really when you really start to study, that is to become an aspect of the system. And we try to focus our courses to a large degree on this, right? To become a part of the natural world is to manage it. Or I should rather say, in order to manage it, we must first become a part of the natural world. You can't manage, that which is separate from you. Right. That's control. That's not management. There's a difference there. And that difference, although it's linguistic, is everything. And so we teach a lot of courses. We have a lot of fun. No, I was going to get
ecological outcome verification. One thing about it is that it's like, unlike organic certification, which is fine if you want to do that, but it's very process oriented. It's somewhat cumbersome in terms of the paperwork involved. Ecological outcome verification is focused on the outcomes. You evaluate a pasture this year, and then next year, and then next year, and you're looking at the outcomes. So what outcomes are you looking for? What did we study for 4 days? When we were on our hands and knees, digging in the dirt with our fingernails and looking at the organic matter and the diversity of plant matter, et cetera. What are you looking for when you do ecological outcome verification?
Yeah, that's a really good question. EOV as a land monitoring protocol, you're trying to gain a representation of total ecosystem function, year in, year out, year over year. What that means to us is soil biology, soil composition, soil chemistry, things like this, soil testing, but at a very deep level. It also includes biodiversity from two perspectives. The first of which is what we would call percentage of prevalence, meaning you might have a pasture that has yellow Indian grass in it, but what percentage of that pasture is yellow Indian grass, right? At the end of an EOV monitoring baselining, if you will know that 17.2% of your pasture is yellow Indian grass, 4.3% is white clover, et cetera. And then year over year, you see this increase and decrease. And the question is not that not that it should increase or decrease, right? That's not the question. It's what is your management trying to create or to co-create? EOV is that data. So after percentage of prevalence, we also do a functional group study. Meaning, what is the health of warm season grasses as a whole, as a community? What is the health of cool season? Sedges and rushes, trees and shrubs, things like this, forbs and legumes. Functional group study. So community health is what we're looking at there. Mm-hmm. And then we look at, wildlife and all sorts of other tangential holes. Mineral processing, mineral decomposition, or mineral cycling, which is, soil organic matter, humus creation, litter, decomposition, dung, what's the dung doing? Are there beetles? Are there ants? Are there microfauna existing in the system? All sorts of other things, erosion and capping and compaction and, some of the less philosophical things, but they're there.
Right. So let's talk about how to stay in touch with you. I'm going to rattle off some ways. There's your Denusion podcast. The podcast is Denusion, which means denuding the illusion.
Yeah.
You're on Instagram and Facebook. There's Robinia Institute. You can look up Robinia Institute. Timshel Wildlands is your farm. A previous book is Wildlife Flowers, and your new book is what?
Dark Cloud Country, the 4 relationships of regeneration. If I could say one thing about that, Wildlife Flowers was very well received. Many, many, many thousands of copies have been sold. And to be honest with you, I'm completely surprised. I thought we would sell 5. But it's all about regeneration being relationship. Dark Cloud Country, as you probably can tell, that's how we see it. Dark Cloud Country is a follow-up to Wildlife Flowers, where it asks, yes, if regeneration is relationship, that's fine, but what is relationship? And so we go into these 4 relationships of regeneration, which are chaos, limits or bounds, art, and this idea of singularity, which we go into depth in the book, of course. But it's coming out in April. We open up pre-orders here in January. You can learn, I think it'll be on Robinia's site. Would be a pretty fine place if you're interested in that.
Daniel Griffith from Wingina, Virginia, Timshel Wildlands, Robinia Institute. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a great conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me out, Hart. We need to do this again.
Most definitely. There's a long list of questions I didn't get to ask you, so we'll do that.
I'm always here. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Blessings.
You.